Welcome home to Passionate Justice 86, and to those of you here in the States, hope you are enjoying a safe, fun-filled Fourth. And to our women in the World Cup final, a word of advice: win. And I trust you know on our nation's birthday just what it is that makes us exceptional. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights, yes. So welcome to Passionate Justice on Our Salon Radio. Thank you all for your continuing and growing support. Soon you'll have so many listening possibilities at Our Salon Radio. Stay alert and reach out to me on Twitter at jwolf41387 for all Passionate Justice news, releases, podcasts. I ask all of you, follow the show on Twitter at jwolf41387, at jwolf41387 on Twitter. And now a new hour, Personal Notes, super guest writers, spurring you on every week, every day, a challenge to create a little more justice in our world. And join our salon where you hear Passionate Justice. It's the very best readers and writers site on the net, growing, created and hosted by California's Lori Wright, and it is free. Join now at www.oursalon.ning.com, www.oursalon.ning.com, and stay tuned, as I say, to the full array of programming on Our Salon Radio. I am author, activist Jonathan Wolfman. The spark for these stories, Passionate Justice, a progressive memoir and essays, is available at Amazon, and I'm so proud to say underwriting for Passionate Justice in 2015 comes from Bud Clayman and OC87 Productions, producers of OC87, RecoveryDiaries.com, and the feature-length film OC87, the obsessive-compulsive major depression bipolar Asperger's movie. Check out OC87, RecoveryDiaries.com. I open with a Passionate Justice nano note. You know, in the week following the murders at Charleston Bible Study, at Mother Emanuel, 5 black churches burned as a result of arson: at Knoxville on 21 June, at Macon on 23 June, at Charlotte on 24 June, at Warrenville, South Carolina on 26 June, and at Tallahassee on 26 June. Take that in. So leading today, a perfect follow-up to our president's soaring eulogy at Reverend Pinckney's funeral at Charleston last week. This from The New Yorker is called Last Battles, and it's from writer Jelani Cobb. In some future footnote or parenthetical aside, it may be observed that although General Robert E. Lee surrendered in 1865, the Confederacy's final retreat did not occur until a century and a half later. The rearguard movement of Republicans in the aftermath of the slaughter in Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church marked the relinquishing of the Confederacy's best fortified positions, the cultural ones. We have for decades willfully coexisted with a translucent lie about the bloodiest conflict in American history and the moral questions at its center. Amid the calls last week to lower the Confederate battle flag at the state capitol, the defenders of the flag averred that it represents heritage, not hate. The great sleight of hand is the notion that these things were mutually exclusive. Americans, both in the South and beyond, attach a particular brand of exceptionalism to the region. This is the reason that there is a Southern historical association but not a Northern one, a genre known as Southern literature but no Northern corollary, and a concept of Southern politics as something distinct from the national variety. The notion of the Confederate flag as a benign tribute to that exceptionalism rests upon another premise that illustrated long before our present concerns with climate change and vaccination did the political usefulness of denial, the idea that the Civil War was not fought over slavery, a claim that would have bewildered those who served in it, allowed Southerners to memorialize the leaders of an armed insurrection without the sticky moral baggage of bondage attached. That interpretation held that the war was sparked by a conflict over tariffs that penalized Southern agriculture to the benefit of Northern industry, or more vaguely that the war was fought over states' rights. This evasion proved amazingly effective. Monuments to the valor of the Confederate ideal dot the South like materiel left on a battlefield, but none of these arguments bear scrutiny. Were the Southerners who erected those monuments concerned primarily about the valor of men, there would be many more dedicated to the former slaves who fought for the Union and risked death, or arguably worse, re-enslavement. Were the war mainly about tariffs, we would be left to think that these fugitives fled farms and plantations to join the Union Army because of their abiding belief in trade protectionism, or that the nearly 40,000 of them who died did so defending their views on federalism. The Confederates themselves did not believe in this. Here is the South Carolina Convention in 1860 explaining its rationale for secession. Quote, "A geographical line has been drawn across the Union, and all the states north of that line have united in the election of a man to the high office of President of the United States whose opinions and purposes are hostile to slavery. He is to be entrusted with the administration of the common government because he has declared that government cannot endure permanently half slave, half free, and that the public mind must rest in the belief that slavery is in the course of ultimate extinction. This sectional combination for the submersion of the Constitution has been aided in some of the states by elevating to citizenship persons who, by the supreme law of the land, are incapable of becoming citizens, and their votes have been used to inaugurate a new policy hostile to the South and destructive of its beliefs and safety." Unquote. The South is exceptional, not primarily because of its literature or its food or its politics, but because the South is exceptional because it is the only region of the United States that has lived for the majority of its history with the experience of military defeat. The South is the only region of the United States that has lived for the majority of its history with the experience of military defeat. 4 decades after the U.S. withdrawal from Saigon, Vietnam remains a spectral presence in American foreign policy and military strategy. But when the Vietnam War began, the South had already been familiar with that kind of recrimination and self-doubt for 100 years. It not only fought tenaciously for the right to own human beings, it did so unsuccessfully. Neither of these facts can be easily accepted, but only one of them can be easily denied. So detached from slavery is the conception of the war that the controversial Memorial Day tradition of sending a presidential wreath to the Confederate Memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which began with Woodrow Wilson, continued to the present. President Obama amended the tradition by also sending a wreath to the African American Civil War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Such denialism has governed an important portion of our national affairs and distorted our self-image, but it collapsed in the hail of fire. in the sanctuary of Emmanuel AME. As is often the case, tragedy was the burden we shouldered for a moment of square introspection. This is probably why the eulogy that Barack Obama delivered for the Reverend Clementa Pinckney on Friday was sober and self-reflective in a way that we seldom hear. The flag, the president said, has always represented more than just ancestral pride. For many, black and white, that flag was a reminder of systemic oppression and racial subjugation. We see that now. Removing the flag from this state's capital would not be an act of political correctness. He added in reference to the Confederate soldiers that it would simply be an acknowledgement that the cause for which they fought, the cause of slavery, was wrong. It may seem odd decades after the civil rights movement to note that for a sitting president to say that the Confederacy fought for the institution of slavery and that doing so was a moral wrong is a radical statement, yet it is. It is still and remains a radical statement, and shortly after making it, the president fell silent. It appeared that perhaps he had lost his way, but then, in a remarkable moment, he began to sing Amazing Grace, a hymn that is at once a lament and a prayer and a hope, written by John Newton, a one-time slave trader who became an abolitionist. Immediately after the speech, people began debating whether the song had been part of the prepared text or whether the president sang it out of an impromptu spiritual imperative. In either case, he was likely hoping to see in the national culture precisely the transformation that Newton had experienced himself, in himself, one that facilitated his first truthful accounting of the evil of slavery. Thank you, Jelani Cobb. Now, a fast but important piece from our friend Daily Kos writer Leslie Salzillo. Largest online Christian organization targets and exposes the Koch brothers for corruption. Faithful America, the Christian organization, is after the Koch brothers. Why? Because the Koch brothers are stepping into the Pope's business, trying to bribe their way into Catholic universities. Why settle for secular colleges when you can buy them all? Perhaps with a little help from social media, this latest Koch business acquisition, maybe it can be squelched. In their online petition, Faithful America states, Pope Francis is making headlines warning that we can no longer trust in the unseen forces and the invisible hand of the market. Growth and justice requires more than economic growth. Meanwhile, in America's flagship Catholic University is planning to take $1 million from the Koch brothers to spread their anti-poor propaganda. The billionaire brothers are the biggest funders of the Tea Party movement and the anti-government think tanks that are waging war on anti-poverty programs. Their credentials are founded in the John Birch Society. But even though the Koch brothers' efforts are clearly out of step with Catholic social teaching, the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. just announced $1 million donation from Koch's to their business and economics school. Catholic University needs to put Pope Francis's vision of a church for the poor ahead of the Koch's radical right-wing agenda. Consider the petition. Don't take the Koch brothers' money. That's the petition. Consider signing it, particularly if you're Catholic. It's not just Catholic University of America either. Florida State students as well and around the country at other campuses are fighting the fight against the Koch's unwanted presence. Now, I'm always grateful to see people of faith stand up for what's good and right in this world. I believe they far outnumber the pseudo-Christian extremists we often see holding and hogging the loudspeaker, spewing racism, homophobia, misogyny. Many thanks to Faithful America for their work. You can sign their petition at http://act.faithfulamerica.org. Go there, faithfulamerica.org. You'll find the petition. Now, from our friend, San Francisco housing and LGBT civil rights activist Tommy Avicola Mecca, we've got gay marriage, now what? It's official. A majority of the Supremes proclaimed that the U.S. Constitution guarantees the right to same-sex marriage in all states. Historic. The love that dare not speak its name will never be silent again. This is not something I could have foreseen. When I came out, gay sex was illegal and gay men were routinely subjected to electroshock therapy to try to turn us straight. Gay bars were raided if their owners failed to pay off the cops, and a drag queen could be arrested for female impersonation if she didn't wear 2 pieces of male clothing. While marriage has never been on the top of my agenda personally or politically, I recognize that for some folks it's an important concern. Since married couples receive many benefits and economic advantages, to be uncoupled is to be a failure in the eyes of society obsessed with that hallmark moment. As far as I'm concerned, the state shouldn't be in the business of legitimizing anyone's relationship, straight or queer, but it is. And as long as it is, it should provide those benefits to all couples. The question is now, next, what will be the burning issue of the mainstream LGBT movement? I hope it's economic justice for all. Economic justice for all. The rate of poverty and homelessness in our community has been skyrocketing. 2 Williams Institute studies demonstrate that as a community, we have as much poverty as every other community. So much for the myth of all our disposable income. The rate of homelessness among queer youth nationally, according to a study by National Lesbian and Gay Task Force and the National Coalition on the Homeless, is between 20 and 40%. If anyone needs to gain equality, it's the invisible poor in our community. The homeless on the streets, people step over and sometimes die on those same streets, and no one notices, even here in the Castro neighborhood. They're the youth who flee here from every corner of the world only to find that they cannot afford the outrageous rents, even with jobs. They're the seniors who live in mortal fear that their buildings will be sold and they'll be tossed out. They're the people with AIDS who realize that the city that cared in the 80s is now the city that finds you for sleeping on the sidewalk or in the parks when you have nowhere else to rest your head. Marriage advocates have for years been stressing that their efforts were about family. It's time. It's time for the LGBT movement to prove that. Not family as in Ozzie Harriet, but as in we are family. All of us together, all of us who identify as LGBTQI, all of us who walk under the banner of the rainbow flag. It's time for the movement to put its time and resources into housing the poor and the homeless in our community, ensuring everyone has a living wage job, protected against discrimination in employment and in housing, safeguarding immigrants, especially those who are undocumented, stopping evictions and foreclosures from stealing our homes, opposing racism, sexism, ageism, and all that separate us from one another, ending anti-queer and anti-transgender violence, addressing an income disparity that leaves so many out in the cold, and fighting police abuse and violence. This struggle's not over. It's just beginning. Well, as I thank Tommy Avicola Mecca of San Francisco, I'll add this, that an absurd word out of Jackson is that Mississippi is considering ending the issuance of all marriage licenses in order to avoid issuing them to its LGBT adult citizens. How's that for family values? Now, here's a related piece and a win in the right to get rid of fraud science in the guise of so-called pray away the gay therapy. Take a listen to Liberal America writer Darrell Lucas and his newest New Jersey Jury finds Pray Away the Gay outfit committed fraud. Last week's landmark ruling in that committed same-sex couples have the right to legally marry was actually the second major victory for gay rights in a 48-hour span. A week ago Thursday, a Hudson County, New Jersey jury delivered a verdict that has the potential to be as earth-shattering as the more well-known one, and this in a case that involved radical right-wing Orthodox Jewish and not Christian psychological fraud and frauds. The jury found that one of the more notorious conversion therapy outfits, Jews offering new alternatives for healing, defrauded its clients when it told them they could be cured of their same-sex attractions. This ruling could potentially put the business, Jonah, out of business. In 2013, 4 gay men working with the Southern Poverty Law Center, God bless that group, sued Jonah, contending that Jonah's so-called therapy violated New Jersey's Consumer Fraud Act. Jonah's fraudulent therapy consisted of, among other routines, having clients strip naked before their counselors, beating effigies of their parents, violent role-playing exercises, and having to endure gay slurs being shouted at them when their treatment didn't work. They were told that it would have worked if they were really committed to turning their lives around. One of the plaintiffs, Benjamin Unger, testified that during one of his sessions he was told that he was too close to his mother. That explained why he was gay. His counselor encouraged him to beat a pillow representing his mother, beat it with a tennis racket. If this weren't so sick, it would be funny. Unger testified that his relationship with his mother was badly strained as a result. He was so traumatized after leaving the program, he was essentially confined to bed for several months. Another plaintiff, Chaim Levin, testified that he was encouraged to take part in what were called healthy touch sessions with his counselor, which included lengthy cuddling. Although Mr. Levin sensed that it didn't feel right, his quote, he eventually gave in. It doesn't sound like anything like what Chaim's mother Bella thought her son would get when she first spoke with Jonah founder Arthur A. Goldberg. When she took the stand, Bella accused Goldberg and Jonah, the organization, of promising something that was just so far from the truth. And that's her quote. The plaintiffs won several major victories before the case went to trial. In February, Hudson County Superior Court Judge Peter Bariso barred several of Jonah's expert witnesses from testifying because their arguments centered around the 4-decades-old, outdated, and wholly refuted argument that homosexuality is a disorder. A week later, Judge Bariso ruled that since the consensus of mental health pros is that homosexuality is not a mental disorder or disease, and any Pray Away the Gay group that makes claims to the contrary has committed fraud. Lee Beckstead, a member of an American Psychological Association task force that peered into the guts of Pray Away the Gay, backed up that consensus when he called Jonah's program worse than snake oil. Those 2 pretrial rulings had the combined effect, you see, of eliminating any rational basis for these conversion therapy groups to exist. There is no rational basis for these so-called conversion therapy groups to exist, Jewish or Christian or Muslim or Martian. It is somewhat surprising that Jonah let this case go to trial. You'd have thought that with its case torn apart and having been told that it committed a crime, Goldberg and associates might have seen the sense in settlement talks. No. Now Goldberg and his colleagues will have to pay. The jury ordered Jonah to pay the plaintiffs over $72,000 in damages, 3 times what the plaintiffs paid for their therapy, as well as for mental health counseling that they all had to attend in order to reverse Jonah's damage. Judge Bariso also has the option of yanking Jonah's business license. If Bariso goes that route, Jonah will have to close its doors. Apparently, Jonah is a glutton for punishment because their attorney, Charles Lamandry of the Freedom of Conscious Defense Fund, good Lord, has already vowed to appeal what he called an attempt by powerful forces to prevent his clients from living according to biblical values. In the past, conversion therapists have claimed attempts to shut them down violate their First Amendment free speech rights. But dig it. Dig this. Come on, you've got to understand this. There is no First Amendment right to engage in consumer fraud. This case will make it a lot easier for juries in other states to find these groups have committed fraud. Let's hope there's indeed more where this ruling came from. And you know, when I teased this piece, a commenter wrote this: "As a Jew, I can't stand it when Jews do horrible things in the name of Judaism. I'm not speaking from a tribal standpoint, but from a religious standpoint. I do not understand how people who actually study Judaism reach the conclusion that technicalities trump principles. I will never understand that." And I appreciated his comment. Here's what I told him. It's easy. Technically wedded small boys and small girls are always drawn to religious and or political extremism to lend faux decency to what they know at root are their own personal demons. Now, here's really out of box for you. Economic news from the European paper The Independent and writer Louis Doré. Utrecht, the Dutch city, will start an experiment which hopes to determine whether society works effectively with universal, unconditional income. The city has paired up with the local university to establish whether the concept of basic income can work in real life and plans to begin the experiment at the end of the summer holidays. Basic income is a universal, unconditional form of payment to individuals which covers their living costs. The concept is to allow people to choose to work more flexible hours in a less regimented society, allowing more time for family care, volunteering, and study. University College Utrecht has paired with the city to place people on welfare on a living income to see if a system of welfare without requirements will be successful. Could it? We don't know. But listen, the Netherlands is no stranger to less traditional work environments. It has the highest proportion of part-time workers in the EU, 46%. Still, Utrecht's experiment with welfare is expected to be the first of its kind. One group will have compensation and consideration for an allowance, another group with a basic income without rules, and a course of control group which adhere to the current rules. Our data shows, they say, that less than 1.5% abuse the welfare, but before we get into all kinds of principled debate about whether we should or should not, we need to first examine if basic income even really works. What happens if someone gets a monthly amount without rules and controls? Will people sit passively at home, or will they develop themselves and provide a meaningful contribution to our society? Boy, those are interesting questions, aren't they? I am delighted that a nation, that a city, Utrecht in the Netherlands, is going to try to figure this one out. We'll have to be willing to experiment, people, in order to improve our world, and I will report back. Now to the Near East, and writer Aaron Heller from the Associated Press. Mr. Heller tells us this, that a new RAND study has found that Israelis and Palestinians would gain how much from peace? Billions. Listen to this. Israelis and Palestinians would gain billions of dollars from making peace with one another, while both would face daunting economic losses in case of other alternatives, particularly in case of a return to violence, according to a new study released Monday. The RAND Corporation, a U.S.-based nonprofit research org, interviewed some 200 officials from the region and elsewhere during more than 2 years of research into the costs of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Its main finding, now dig this, listen to this closely, its main finding was that following a peace agreement, Israelis stood to gain $120 billion over the course of a decade, and the Palestinians would gain $50 billion, marking a 36% rise in their average per capita income. In contrast, the Israeli economy would lose some $250 billion in foregone economic opportunities in a return to violence, and the Palestinians, well, they would see their per capita gross domestic product fall by as much as nearly 50%. The findings are in line with long-time arguments that peace is the economic interest of both sides. The study looked into 5 different scenarios: a 2-state solution, a coordinated unilateral withdrawal, an uncoordinated unilateral withdrawal, nonviolent resistance, and a violent uprising. Not surprisingly, the economic benefit for both sides dropped considerably in each alternative scenario down that ladder. Some of the elements of the nonviolent resistance scenario are already unfolding, with Palestinians taking actions to put economic and international pressure on Israel. The study found that Israelis could lose $80 billion and Palestinians could lose $12 billion relative to current trends, but compared with a 2-state solution, losses from the nonviolent resistance scenario become even more dramatic, about $200 billion for the Israelis and $60 billion for the Palestinians. RAND teams are currently in the region right now, presenting their findings to both Israeli and Palestinian officials. In reaching their conclusions, researchers devised a cost of conflict calculator that factored in issues such as Israelis' defense budget, their trade relations, and what it would cost to relocate West Bank settlers. For Palestinians, variable costs included potential destruction of property, freedom of movement, and banking regs. The Palestinians seek the West Bank and Gaza Strip as part of their future state, yet numerous rounds of peace talks have been unsuccessful. A 2-state solution produces by far the best economic outcomes for both Israelis and Palestinians, said the RAND study. In a decade, the average Israeli would see his or her income rise by about $2,200 versus $1,000 gained for Palestinians, each of them, compared with our projection for present trends. But that only works out to 5% for each Israeli versus 36% for the average Palestinian, meaning Israelis have far less and Palestinians far more economic incentive to move toward peace. That is, individual Israelis and Palestinians. Still, RAND sent copies of the study to officials on both sides of the conflict, including the Israeli Prime Minister's office and Foreign Ministry and the Palestinian Finance Ministry. But you want a punchline as we thank Aaron Heller for this very interesting piece? So far, neither side is willing to comment. Wrapping today, from our new friend, writer Alice Lane of Oakland, and you may know her work under the name Seventh Sister. She says this: as I reflect on and grieve over the recent terrorist attack on the congregants of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, what comes to my mind over and over again is spirit murder, a term Columbia University law professor Patricia J. Williams coined some years back to describe a particularly gruesome murder committed by a white man in the 1960s. 39 times he stabbed his victim, an African-American man who was engaged in civil rights work. I wondered for a long time, Ms. Williams wrote, what it would that would not die, what it would be that would not die, what could not be killed by the 4th, 5th, or even 10th knife blow, what sort of thing would not die with the body but lived on in the mind of the murderer. Williams realized that whatever lived In this man's mind, his act was not merely an act of bloody murder, it was also spirit murder. When Dylan Storm Roof stood up and announced before killing 9 African American women and men that you're taking over our country and you have to go, what he announced in no uncertain terms was that he intended to kill not only as many black bodies as he could, but he also intended to murder our hopes, our aspirations, our dreams, our spirits. For what he saw before and after he walked through the doors of Emmanuel was not a people cowed, subjugated, colonized, and segregated, as his racist paraphernalia taught we should be, but instead the intolerable vision of a people who had been taken over, a people of power, who were expressing as well as affirming it, people who now had taken over, affirming it in a sacred place, a spiritual refuge that for centuries often nurtured our souls and reminded us that regardless of the narratives and systems that were in place to confine, control, even kill us, we were and are always something more, something boundless and unbossed. Of course, powerful though they may be, powerful though we may be, the material realities under which most of us live, increasing economic inequality, an oppressive criminal justice system, segregation, miseducation, etc., make clear that we have not taken over anything, the presidency notwithstanding. Nevertheless, usurpation is what many of our countrymen and women aching with nostalgia for slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, apartheid, colonialism see. It's what they see when they look at us through lenses distorted by their hatred generally and hatred specifically for Barack Obama and all that he represents, or perhaps what they see and what they hate, what lives in their minds is our hope, particularly the hope that Obama's 2008 and 2012 elections rekindled in us, and that they have tried to kill over and over again through public policies, policing, and propaganda wars, waged from the halls of universities to AM radio stations to courts of law. They see, in other words, the same kind of hope that the civil rights workers no doubt held for the future, and which his murderer found absolutely intolerable. But it will not die. It will not die, this spirit, this hope of ours. Could we not argue that America is about freedom, whether we live it or not, asked Reverend Clementa Pinckney in 2013. Freedom, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. And that is what church is all about. Freedom to worship and freedom from sin. Freedom to be full of what God intends us to be. And to have equality in the sight of God. And sometimes you got to make noise to do that. Sometimes you have to march, struggle, and be unpopular to do that. Though among the men and women Roof murdered, Reverend Pinckney lives on in spirit, and we will speak his words as we march, struggle, make noise, and move out of our way anything that stands between us and freedom, equality, and happiness. And there's not a bullet in the world that can stop us. Not a bullet in the world that can stop us. Oh, thank you, Elise Lane. And now I want your words, your comments, your stories. Send me your stories, your poems, your essays. Let passionate justice give them added and broadened life. Send them to me at jwolf41387 @AOL.com, and follow this program on Twitter at jwolf41387, because you've got so much more. You have passionate justice. All the while you keep trying to live as if justice, this justice we talk about week to week, you try to live as if it matters, as if what your kids and what you do, it matters. Be creative, courageous. Take your place on that great Mandela next to Bud Clayman, Jelani Cobb, Leslie Salzillo, Tommy Avicola Mecca, Louis Dorway, Dorel Lucas, Aaron Heller, and next to me, and Elise Lane. Because this is our brief moment of time, Phil Oakes. Phil Oakes said, I guess I'll have to do it while I'm here. Could he have been more right? Could he have been more right? You repair this crazy place. I'll help. You see, you can repair this crazy place. And I promise, when you act on justice's behalf, it pays back. And it will most definitely make you happy. Watch for and listen to our 87th on Our Salon Radio, and follow the show on Twitter at jwolf41387, because there and everywhere it's passionate justice.